Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Heart Shaman podcast, where we talk about spiritual healing, shamanic wisdom, and the challenges of walking the healer's path. My name is Nadia Harenkiu, and today is episode number 28, The Art of Property Clearing and Blessing. Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the podcast today. We are talking about one of my most favorite things that I do, and that is property clearings. This is one of my, I love it when people contact me to do property clearings because they're so interesting and they're so much fun. And I regret that I don't have a lot of people in the area I'm currently living who might be interested in such things. But I got so many requests in Portland. I loved it. So today we're talking about property clearings. I'll tell you a little bit about my background with them. So one of the people that I mentored with earlier on my path was an Armenian shaman, and her family specialized in land and property clearings. And so she trained me in this practice. My style is a bit different than hers, which is to be expected with any kind of mentorship, but I still love it. And I think of her every time I go to a new house. So, oh, property clearings, where to even start? This is about working with the unseen world as it impacts the physical world. So, the first question I want to address is why physical space holds energy and how that impacts us. So, the short answer is trauma. When something traumatic has happened in a physical space, that space gets frozen in time. And in my world, I can feel frozen in time. And so I will step into a place and I'll be like, oh God, this place hasn't been alive or it hasn't been touched since the 70s or the 60s or whatever date range I tune into. So when a trauma occurs, it basically freezes the time space continuum and nothing moves forward from that moment. There's no life. The spirit has checked out. And so we don't have spirit support or protection in that space. Um, this is the same thing that happens when there's trauma to us as humans, either physically or in the mind. It gets frozen in time space until it's released. So fascinating. What can cause this is like the trauma itself creates that frozen piece. You can also have an echo of events, like an echoing of that trauma or an echoing of that energy that impacted the space. And you can also re-experience the trauma in some way, shape, or form as an inhabitant or passerby of that space. So when we talk about this, we're very much touching on the concept of energetic imprints, and that would be something imprinting on its environment. A traumatic event, a traumatic argument, a severe illness, or other things in the land's history. There can also be residual energy from previous owners and tenants, and I'll give some examples of that in a few minutes. Spirits and ancestors and entities may be attached to the space, and so you might be feeling them as well. There's also an occurrence that when a space, particularly a house, is vacant, the house actually hates to be empty. It was built to have people live in it. And so the house will invite spirits in. Like it will say, I'm empty. I don't want to be empty. Like, come live in one of these rooms. It's super fascinating. Every time I rent an Airbnb, that is the experience that I have. Like, I can feel that there are other beings living in the house because the Airbnb is empty for a certain amount of time throughout the year. And typically, I'm not allowed to clear Airbnbs unless the land asks me to or the house asks me to, because it's not my property, it's not my place. Generally, the spirits will just tuck away while we're there and be respectful of what we're doing because they don't want to leave and they don't want to negatively impact anybody. They're just there to hang out. They're there to live there. So common signs that a space needs clearing is that it feels really heavy. It can feel really suffocating. You might have unexplained disturbances like slamming doors or electrical issues or lights going on and off, sometimes creaking, recurring quote unquote bad luck, feeling exhausted or like generally gross. You may have symptoms of like a haunting where you see things out of the corner of your eye or things are moving. And kind of a more extreme case of that is night terrors. Most of the time, I will say night terrors are about the person creating the experience, but sometimes it is about what's in the house. It just depends. And that's why it's important to get a professional in to read the situation for you. I want to talk a little bit about some of my stories with property clearings so you get a better picture of why property clearings matter and when you might need one. So, the first one is this property that I rented for the purpose of doing shamanic work. It's the first time that I've ever been to an Airbnb where the house and the property begged me to do a clearing. As soon as we stepped on the property, I knew we could not proceed until we did a clearing. I'd never been there before. I didn't know anything about it, but the land felt frozen in time. It felt like it had been frozen for about 50 or 60 years. There was zero life on the property. Like the land spirits were gone, the tree spirits were gone, the plants, there was no wildlife. Like it was just bizarre. And then in the house, it felt oppressive. There was even like one of the bedrooms was locked and we couldn't get a hold of the landlord to come down and unlock it. Like we had paid for this 5 bedroom house, but the fifth bedroom was locked. Super weird. So we did a clearing, not just in the house, but also the land. And as we went through, as we went through the property, me and one of my co-facilitators, it became super clear that not just one person had suffered there, many people had suffered there. Come to find out, it used to be one of those adult care facilities where elderly go, I don't want to say hospice, but like where they live out their final years. And there must have been a ridiculous amount of turmoil or abuse in that house. It was so bad. Now, the interesting thing is, like I said, we got there and one of the doors was locked. We finally got someone out to unlock that door. And the room that was locked was actually the worst room in the entire house. Like whoever was in there, whatever happened in there was absolutely brutal. And clearing that room was like the key that unlocked the rest of the property. So we went through and cleared the house, we cleared the land. We ended up having multiple ceremonies there to facilitate the clearing, and we worked on it for 4 days. And that's when it finally broke through and the whole place came back to life. And I think the coolest part about that is that the entire group felt that shift, that it wasn't just me, that like each of them described like how things were feeling differently in the house and feeling differently on the land. It was really profound. So that was not a paid land clearing. It was a bonus, but it was super interesting. My next story is actually about a piece of land that I'm working on here in Florida. So I got here a few months ago. I've been trying to make connections with people to hold ceremonies on the land. Specifically, I enjoy tobacco ceremony outside. And I met this couple who owned 17 acres nearby, and they're like, "We've been trying to get someone to come out here and hold events on our land." And I'm like, "Amazing. It's a perfect match." And the first time I went to go visit their property, it felt bad. It just felt so bad and so heavy. And every time like we got deeper into the brush or the forest, it was like a new kind of heaviness, and it just kept shifting and changing. And I could feel so much trauma on this land. Now, aesthetically, the property was beautiful. There was a lot of plant life, a lot of animal life, but it just felt off. And I had asked the owner not to tell me about the history of the land up front because I wanted to kind of go in without any preconceived notions of what was going on. And 10 minutes into the walk, I was like, okay, you have to tell me what happened on this property because I don't even know what to do with what I'm seeing. And she told me that it used to be a hog farm, and it was the kind that they let them loose and people come in and like sit in those sniper things off the ground and shoot at the animals. So there's a lot of trauma, not from people, but from animals there, and that land is just holding it. So I've previously done one ceremony on this land. That was just last weekend. I could feel the portal opening up. I could feel sludge kind of be draining out of it. And then as I walked around a little bit, the land was very clear, like, we need another ceremony over here, and we need another ceremony over here. So it's not always like a cut and dry, one and done, with a clearing. Sometimes the land needs multiple steps and it needs multiple things in order to fully be brought back to life. So that was really interesting. I did a property clearing once in Portland where I went into the master bath and the whole place looked like it had been covered in black sludge. Like it coated the walls and the shower, and I felt like I was going to suffocate. Like it was so nasty. And what the spirits kept showing me was that someone was going in there to cry on a regular basis. So all of that turmoil and pain that they were feeling, that room literally took it on. Like it was like they painted the walls with it. The master bedroom closet was also the same. Someone had gone in there to hide and spew their emotions because they were not safe to do it in the rest of the house. That was really cool. Well, it was cool for the house to to show me, but just also like the importance of when we're going and hiding to express ourselves, to express our emotions, and we're not able to safely express them within the unit of like the family unit, it really like it takes a toll on us. It takes a toll on our surroundings, and that energetic imprint was there. And these people didn't necessarily have like any crazy experiences in this house, but they were like, "Oh, we just feel like the house needs to have a clean slate." So I found that in the bathroom and the master closet. And then there was also like a lot of residual energy in cabinetry under the stairs in the basement area. So the house was showing me like energy gets trapped in this area of the house. You have to keep it clean. So don't allow clutter to build up here or it will trap energy. And that means that it'll trap in your house, but it also like has an impact on you and an impact on your family because all of these things have soul. They all have sentience when they get to be big enough, right? So if you have this energy pocket in your house where stuff keeps flying into and it's not being processed and cleared, eventually it actually grows sentience and starts to literally haunt you. So that's fun. um, there was another property that had hauntings. Like legitimate, we feel like this space is haunted. Um, Probably the first haunted house I've ever done, quote unquote haunted house. Interestingly, the child in the house was a medium. And not only was she like interacting with the dead unconsciously, the house was also full of spiritual guides. Like she had so much spiritual protection. The house was literally full. And yeah, like everyone in the house could feel it, and they were pretty freaked out about it. So this is also one of the important kind of side notes is you have to cultivate these gifts in kids. Like they're a gift, whether they want them or not, whether you want them or not. And if you're not helping them recognize and work with them, they're going to take over from the shadows, not only now, but when they get older as well. And then the last story that I want to share is also about a recent clearing. So I passed through, I think it was my first time in Mississippi. I stayed at a client's house and I did a property clearing for her, and it was awesome. Like, there was a death in the family, a lot of trauma, a lot of toxicity in relationship. Um, and doing the house clearing kind of like, it feels like it pulls a drain on the tub. Like, you can feel it draining out all the heaviness and all the ick. And that was awesome. I went and revisited 4 or 6 weeks later, and the house felt amazing in comparison. It was so cool. What I did not feel the first time I was there, because of all the gunk, was that there was a property next door to her that was filled with dead people. Now, this whole area was plantation land, so there was a lot of trauma there. Slavery was definitely in the air. And then even to the extent where some of the trees still have chains in them from that era, which honestly is mortifying. So I cleared this person's house and her property, but the property next door wasn't hers. And so I did not have permission to clear it. When I asked if I could, they said no. And it felt like the beings were like I could see them all looking at me. Dead people have a very specific signature to them, I guess you could say. And it was like they were chained to the land. Like they weren't allowed to leave. I wasn't allowed to get them to leave. So somebody is hanging on to them or to that history somewhere. It's also possible that somebody did some spell work or black magic that kind of like kept them to the chained to the land. I'm not really sure. That doesn't happen much. I've never had dead people still be on a property after I cleared it, but I've also never experienced like that solid barrier where I'm here on this property and I've cleaned it up, but the property next door is a mess and I'm not allowed to touch it. Wish I could get in touch with that landowner. That would be really cool. Actually, I'm going to throw in one final story. One of my recent clearings, again in Portland, was a woman who felt really bad in the lower level of her house. And that part of the house had like her workshop in it. It was where she was going to do art. It was the first time that she had been out on her own after losing her husband. Like this was her house. Really gorgeous house. And she called me in for a clearing, and I went, and the house felt great. When I got to the downstairs, I felt it. I felt the crushing weight, the like the stuckness, the trauma. And when I sat down there with it, when I talked to it and negotiated with it, the spirits had shown me that this was actually her. It was her inner oppression of self-expression. So this place that should be for her where she can be creative, where she can express herself in a new way, where nobody else is sharing that space with her. Almost like there were some beliefs that she didn't deserve it. There was some old emotions that needed to be processed that blocked her from receiving it. There was just a lot of connection to her. So actually, the house provided a reflection of, hey, you have to heal this in order to have this space, in order to be comfortable here. You have to do this healing work. So her and I actually went from a property clearing into healing ceremony a few months later or weeks later, and we cleared out those emotions. We cleared out the stuff that was preventing her from enjoying the space, and she's honestly a completely different person, and her house is a completely different house. So that's also potential. So let's talk next about shamanic techniques for clearing spaces. Everybody is different with this, including myself. Every time I do a property clearing, something different comes up or gets put down. Sometimes I just need to walk onto a property and the whole thing cashes out. Like it just clears automatically because that's my intention, and I hold it so firmly that it's like instantaneous. When that happens, it's pretty cool. When that doesn't happen, smudging is a big part of the process, smoke medicine, and what plants you use depend on the space. For me, I choose plants based on frequency. So when I enter a space, that space has a frequency, and my job is to bring the opposite or balancing frequency into the space to cash it out and clear it. So like sometimes that's Palo Santo, sage, cedar, copal, tobacco. It just depends. Another piece of this is sound. So breaking things up, and that could be with like drumming, singing bowls, rattles, sometimes singing, sometimes other noises. Sometimes if I don't have anything, I will literally use a supplement bottle, because it's not, the item is not the point. It's the intention to break up the stagnant energy. It's an important thing with spiritual work. We get really hung up on our fancy tools. Most people don't need fancy tools. You just have to have the belief firmly enough and the intention firmly enough, and it just happens. Sometimes we bring in elemental pieces like fire, water, earth, or air. Sometimes I'm calling in specific spirits or angels. In general, I do a lot of portal opening, and this just happens naturally. It's part of who I am as a shaman. But it's like, let's say there's a lot of deceased people who are kind of mulling around. We'll open up a portal to the other side, and they all just get ushered right through. That's cool. And sometimes I open a portal so things can come in, because whatever's going on needs bigger support than what I personally have, and other beings will come in and assist me. Occasionally, there will be instructions from the house or from the land to place crystals, to use salt. When I was building my ceremony space in Vancouver, I was asked to put symbols on the floor under the carpet, very specific symbols that were to enhance protection. Now, I am not big on the protection thing. I believe in enhancing, amplifying, and calling out the heart, and that nothing can survive in a space of love. But occasionally the spirits are like, yeah, we need some protection. When I built my house a couple years ago, I actually buried iron keys around the perimeter. And then the house had very specific instructions on what crystals it wanted to have placed in the windows and in the corners. And I do that for people as well too. Sometimes I need to build a grid in their house, and the grid is to amplify something or to protect something or to open up certain channels. So grid placement can be part of the equation. And then for other people, like prayers are a big part of the process. This is personally not how I operate. I simply know when I have the intention, and the intention is clear. I also know that I have the support, and so I get the support. I consider my entire life to be a prayer, and I live in a space of ceremony. I pray when it feels right, but in most cases, it's more of just a knowing and honoring and walking through life like that. And then the last part of my process is going into an altered space to communicate with the land and the house spirits to see if there's any messages that need to come through. Occasionally, the house will, like what I shared before about not keeping clutter in certain areas, the house will say, like, we don't like the lighting in this room, or you need to put some plants in here, or you have to open the shades, or please change the colors on the walls. You would be surprised how specific a house can be with what it likes, but also it's there to house you, it's there to serve you, and so it's trying to help enhance your experience as a occupant. So it's important to listen. And I do encourage people to get in touch with the spirit of their house. You absolutely can. Doing shamanic journey work to visit the spirit of your house can be very helpful. Same with the spirit of the land. And those are two very different things. Sometimes just when I'm walking through someone's house, the spirit of the house or the land will start speaking to me immediately, like what's happening, what it needs. And my job is to just take notes and convey it to the property owner. One of the more interesting messages I ever received during a property clearing was a warning. Um, the occupants of this particular property had been through, I think, like 2 fires and 1 flood, which they survived, and a lot of their stuff survived, and they just had to like refurnish the house. No, what's the word? Renovate the house. Anyway, I did a property clearing after all that, and still there was a warning. It was, you know, you're not present enough, and we're trying to warn you that something bad is going to happen. Something bad is going to happen. So those 3 were actually like warnings, which is terrifying. But the property will speak. It will speak loudly if you are listening. Now, in terms of working with the spirits of the land, that is, I find, not so straightforward. Land has its own distinct consciousness and history. Connecting with those spirits take a bit more trance work, a bit more time and space and patience. Then you have the ancestors that are from the land. You have the nature beings, which, oh God, can be plants and trees, but can also be like watchers and fae. Depending on what land you're on, there's a lot of different components when we're doing land clearing. And land work is one of my natural abilities. It's one of the things that's most strong to me, which is why I do so much travel. Because I'm interacting with the land, I'm activating the land. My job is to actually bring the land back to a place of being able to remember or thrive or come back to life, essentially. It's one of my roles is to facilitate that. And it's important to offer gratitude when you're working with a land, whether that's like water, tobacco, flowers, songs. I personally love making offerings with baked goods, and it has to be something that I baked myself. The Fae especially, they love baked goods. Scones is one of my personal favorites to share. Beer can also be a big one. When I'm going to a land, I pay close attention to my intuition the days before I visit. And I'll often, without understanding why, start collecting things from my house, certain stones, certain crystals, certain pieces of jewelry. I have been asked to surrender some of the weirdest things into land as an offering, including like, you know, an expensive piece of jewelry or my favorite crystal or a book. Um, if you listen, it will tell you what it wants and it'll take it from you. And there's always a reason. It's really interesting. Now, as far as the blessing part of this conversation, um, the first part of property clearing is clearing, it's revitalizing, it's rebalancing the property. The second part is the blessing. Now, I believe that blessings happen automatically with a lot of my work. Sometimes I'm feeling really called to do specific prayer or intention setting around the home or sacred space or property. Sometimes the clients really want to do their own intentions or conversations around what they want to bring in. And sometimes the property will say, like, you need to have more people. Do you agree to do that? Like, you need to have more gatherings in your home. Do you agree or not? And that's part of the new intention for the house is to gather the people there. You can also add it in rituals for prosperity or peace, calling in certain spirits or ancestors, deities. I personally don't do that. I believe we have our beings and they're here and they support us. Um, yeah, it's just not something that I'm often called to do. And then occasionally, again, like people are called to do protective boundaries with wards or sigils or objects. I think in general, we should do protection when it's called for. We shouldn't do it automatically. In most cases, there's natural protection, and by putting up boundaries, we prevent things from coming in that are good, or we attract things that are not because we've said we need protection. So, just things to consider in the process. So, let's talk about when to do it yourself and when to call a shaman. So, a lot of people try to clear their property before they call me, right? The last thing you want to do is pay someone a couple $100s to come to a property clearing for you, or maybe not. I don't know. And so people will usually try to do this process first. And that's great. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think with the multidimensional nature of this process, it's often hard for, like, I find that in most cases, you can only hold space for what you can hold space for. And taking an entire property and collapsing time and space and clearing out energies and opening portals and calling in new energies, it's a skill set, man. And so I think that's what a lot of properties actually need. I don't know the percentage of people who have successful clearings before they call me, but I do know that everyone who calls me has tried themselves first. So you can certainly go down this route if it calls to you, whether it be smoking out, having a ceremony, having intention settings, using the instructions that I laid out here. And if it works, amazing. And if it doesn't, call a shaman. um, I don't believe that there are any risks of attempting to clear things by yourself. Like, I just don't. If you can't, you can't. I don't think you're going to um, cause any problems. But I'm going to have a caveat with that one. When I was staying in Portland initially about 6 years ago, I was renting a house from someone and it wasn't my house. This probably should have been my first like red flag internally. But it felt like there was something happening in one of the walls and then in one of the mirrors. There was definitely an active portal in the mirror and I tried to close it and they retaliated. And then whatever was happening in the walls, I tried to clear it and it felt like I had kicked a beehive and energetically like I was being stung for several days after that. Now, I'm not sure if that's because I wasn't allowed to, because it wasn't my house, because I wasn't skilled enough at that point. I'm honestly not really sure. So, I mean, there's risks, but I don't really think most people encounter those types of things. So, in general, pretty safe to try to clear it yourself. Unless we're talking about like really violent entities or severe night terror stuff, um, poltergeisty stuff, which I have yet to encounter personally. But, use your gut. If you feel like you need to call a professional, call a professional. Um, in terms of like the importance of proper training or lineage in shamanic practice with property clearing, I don't really think that's a need for safety. I think it's a need for integrity and effectiveness. My mentorship with the Armenian shaman definitely gave me a better understanding of how to do these things. It gave me a better level of confidence, practical instruction, and me knowing who I am and believing in myself and taking those trainings and combining those things is what makes me awesome at property clearing. It's not because I have a training or because of a lineage or strictly because of me. It's a combination. So I think training is important, not for safety, but for integrity and effectiveness. So, in conclusion, it's important to maintain a clear and relatively high vibrational space. Every person and every space impacts you. So, everyone who lives in the house itself, the land, if you're feeling drained or if you're feeling like something's off or you don't feel safe, like call someone. Call someone to help you to read the situation, to figure out where your energy is going, to figure out if something on the land like needs to be crossed over or cleared in some way. We all deserve to have a happy and safe place to live. And sometimes this is part of the equation. So I recommend personally to keep up with your space, like daily, monthly, quarterly maintenance practices for energy hygiene. When I was asked to install a crystal grid in my house, they asked me to change it like once every 8 to 12 weeks. And I did that. Sometimes I smoked out the house every time the energy felt really heavy, or what else? Drumming, singing, pay attention. Your house will tell you what it wants and what it needs in order to be kept at like a high vibration. Now, this is where I invite you to book a property clearing if you ever want one. My prices are good. And I'm in Central Florida right now. I will be making my way up the East Coast in the summertime. My end destination is still unclear, but I will be up there looking at Minnesota in July-ish, but have places to stop in Virginia and North Carolina and potentially Georgia. So if you're along that path and you're looking for a clearing, get in touch with me and we'll see if we can make it happen during my travels. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I hope that you found this episode to be super interesting, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to know more about me and my work, you can find me at www.sacredheartshaman.com.